Hey everyone, so I'm going to make a video today about kind of continuing from our video last time, but hopefully maybe providing a little bit more theory and maybe a little more theory, but also maybe a little more sophistication here. So the issue that we're going to talk about today is scope and the kind of related solution or the related concept of global variables. Because scope is going to introduce some kind of problems or some limitations, kind of. I mean, I wouldn't say they're problems because there's a reason they're there. But it's going to maybe give you a bit of a challenge here in your code. And then global variables are going to be the solution to that problem, or just, kind of having a better understanding of how global variables work will help us better understand scope. So basically, scope refers to when variables are visible. So where can they be seen? Where can they be accessed? Where do they exist? Because so far, when we've made a variable, we have been able to access it kind of throughout our code. But we've only been working kind of within the main method. Right? All of our code so far, up until really we started making our own methods in TMC, or we're starting to work with like mouse down or mouse up in our Java Draw, now we're starting to work with other methods. So we need to think a little bit, we need to understand a little bit more about scope. So the way that I like to think about this is that, I'm going to try and make this as, if I can zoom out here. Yeah, great. Okay. The way that I like to think about this, I like to think in terms of like boxes. So what we have is we have one big giant, or I might kind of refer to these as like hierarchies, like kings, and I'll maybe mix some metaphors in here. But the biggest box that we have is the class, and that's like our entire file. Our entire file is within a class. So if I pop over to my coding, I have this class here, public class main. That is the big giant box. It kind of starts and ends with these brackets. Everything that we code is somewhere inside of this. Inside of these class brackets. Okay, so that's like the first big box. And then we have some smaller boxes in here. And actually, if I go back to my code, I've started to write some stuff, and I'll show some demonstrations later. But I have this first method, main, and I have another method, start, and then I have a third method, mouse down. These are all kind of existing within the larger box of the class. And so sometimes I think about this as like the big boxes, like the king, it's in charge of everything, and then we have other boxes underneath it. Maybe these are dukes or princes, princesses, I'm not sure what they are, but we have these other boxes in here. And we'll call this like the main one, and then I'm going to try and leave myself some room, and let's just call this one like, we'll do this as like, we'll ignore the start one for now, we'll call this like mouse down. Okay, so we have these two boxes. So variables that are defined within a box only exist within that box. So if I make a rectangle object here, or I make an integer, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. If I do like integer num is equal to 7 or something here, this variable only exists inside of this box. Because I created it within the main method, I can't access it within mouse down. And I can prove that to you. If I try and go into the main method here, and I make something, well, int num is equal to 7, that's fine. But now if I try and do something, I don't know, something silly, like I'm going to, I'll just, whenever I click, I want to print out system out print. Oh, I don't know what's going on with that. I'm just going to print out the value of number. And we'll immediately get an error here, and it'll say syntax error, num cannot be resolved to a variable. So it's like, what thing are you talking about that doesn't exist? And when you see this for this first time, you might be confused, like, well, it's up here, the program's working, or something's broken. Like, no, the problem is that this variable only exists within this box. And this is a separate box, so we can't really directly access them. And can be good and bad. I mean, that seems like kind of annoying. But say, for instance, we're using like a variable like count up here. We're starting with count 0, and we're going to do some loops or while loops or whatever we're going to do up here. We can also reuse or recycle that variable down here, and we won't run into a conflict. Because this count and this count are different. They are different variables. They exist in different boxes. So we can use the same keyword or the same variable name in multiple different places as long as we define them kind of within this box. And that's really nice because when you get to more sophisticated code, you don't want to accidentally be overwriting a variable with another variable. Like we reuse count, and then suddenly the count variable in one place is affecting the count variable in another place unintentionally. This is a way to protect you so that your variables can't be modified except where you want them. So it's an idea called encapsulation, and I'll put that over here. It's a big, if you're going to take the AP test, this is a big, oh, it should be only one C, it's encapsulation. I think my mouse is just there, a little writing tab thing's not helping me. Anyway, so it's encapsulation. We're trying to keep our stuff separate. All right, talked enough about that. So anything that exists inside of this box, and we can kind of actually even go deeper with these boxes. Let me give myself a little more box room here. We can actually even go deeper because there's other boxes that might exist within mouse down, and some of those might be, or like exist within any method. For example, if I have a while loop, a while loop is an even smaller box than the mouse down, but it works the same way in that anything I define inside of this while loop, in count or in num or whatever it is, only exists within this block. Like while this block is running, it exists, but you can't access this variable outside of the while loop. That's why whenever we make a while loop, we normally start with we start by having a count variable up here. Outside of the while loop, in count is 0. And now if we do a while loop in here, we can access count. Right? Because this box exists within this box, so anything that we made within this bigger box is accessible within the smaller. It's just not, we just can't go the other way. We can't go from the small box to the big box because we want to kind of keep these things separate. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff in there, and again, you know, reach out to me, talk to me in class if it doesn't make sense, send me an email, whatever it is. Hopefully we'll get some practice in here as well. But this idea of boxes is really important. Another box that we have is like an if statement. I think those are the two biggest ones, conditionals and loops. I can't think of anything else that would have a box like this. But if we make a statement within an if we define a variable in there, it's not going to be accessible outside of it. If we want to, same way with count, like if we want to have a variable that's going to change, or like, okay, so we can have our count, we could modify it inside of the while loop, and then we could print it later. And any changes that we make in here will show up later on, okay? Because yeah, count was defined within this method. It's getting changed within the while loop, and then we can print it out up here. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff there. But this idea of boxes, I hope, is an important one. Is hopefully a helpful kind of visual to keep in mind for why this works the way it does and the kind of logic that exists within Java. Last thing that I want to do. So what we might want to have here is something like, and I explained this in the last video, but I wanted to go in more in depth because it's such an important idea, is the idea of a global variable. Because we might have something, instead of doing all this mouse stuff and all that, that's fine, we might want to have, you know what, I'm going to just put this over here, we might want to have like a rectangle that's going to be able to be modified in different places. Like for example, maybe we want to be able to create I want to show a rectangle when the program runs, but then when I hit the spacebar, I want to change the color of that rectangle. Okay, so the problem with this is that if I do something like this, okay, rectangle is new rectangle, it's going to just default to being, I think, a black rectangle. And then what I want to do is inside of my mouse down, I want to change the color, so I could say like rect. I think we access color. I have to check the documentation. I'm going to do a color. Oh, color. That should work. Oh, we don't want to change it to that. Maybe we want to change it to, I'm going to change it to like pink. But again, we're going to have that issue here where this variable can't be resolved. We don't know what it is because it's only defined within this method. What we can do is, well, if you refer back to our idea of boxes, what we really need to do is if we want it to be available in these boxes in this, if we want a variable to be available both in that main box, but also in that mouse down box or spacebar, or whatever you're going to use, we can't define the variable within these two boxes. We need to define it for the entire class. We need to define it in the big, giant, king of all boxes, the class. So up here, I can make a rectangle called rect. Yeah, and then we can access this rectangle within the rest of the boxes because it exists within the big box, so it's going to exist within all of the other smaller ones as well. So what I want to do here, and a really good habit here to do, we want to define, just kind of initialize the variable up here. Say, hey, I'm going to have a variable called rect kind of, in the entire class. And then probably within start, we could then, like this is declaring it, and then we could initialize it within start. And then we could modify it within mouse down. So we can do all this different stuff because rect is defined across all of our methods. So now if we run this, or I'm going to open up the browser here. And as we run this, I'm going to try and stop this now because I know it's going a little bit long. But as we run this, this will load up. I think the whole graphics plus recording plus all that takes a little bit out of the computer. And so now we have our black rectangle because we just used the default color. But now when I click, it changes to pink. And there's a lot of stuff we could do in there, like maybe I want to click again and it's going to change back to black or different color or random color. There's a lot of stuff in there you can mess around with. Okay, so the main takeaways from here. This is a global, so I think the main takeaways are variables only exist within the box they're created and any sub boxes that are within that box. So what I mean, like we have this big giant class box, anything created within that big giant box is available in the smaller ones. Same way, if we go a step deeper, if we create something within the main method, it's also going to exist within any of the while loops, while blocks that kind of exist inside of that. And then we have this idea of using global variables. So what we did in this thing was a global variable. We made a rectangle here. We defined this kind of across the entire class. We initialized it here. It's a really important kind of process to separate, declare, and then initialize here. And then we're able to access it across all these other methods. All right, that's a long video. I'm going to stop it, but that's a super, super important idea. Challenging one. Yeah,